I never feared primitives. For over 200 cycles, my kind, the Zayari, held dominion over the western spiral of the galactic rim. We were masters of arcane physics, builders of worm bridges, and architects of quantum collapse arrays. Civilizations bowed before our knowledge. Planets that dared to question our superiority became nothing more than archived ruins. So when the Council first spoke of Terrans, a backwater species from a minor star, I barely listened. They were a curiosity at best, newly discovered, barely Class 2 on the galactic tech ladder. Their planet emitted more garbage frequencies than clean signals. Their history was violent, brutish, infantile. Naturally, they'd catch the eye of the exploratory corps. We made contact under observation protocols. Unarmed vessels, high orbit, simple translations. Even their first reaction to us was expected. Panic, disbelief, the launch of primitive missiles that fizzled against our shielding. They weren't a threat. They couldn't be, but something wasn't right. Their fear didn't last. Within months, Earth was watching, not begging, not revering, watching, recording everything. Hundreds of their satellites tracked our ships. Thousands of ground-based scanners followed our landers. They didn't worship us. They studied us like prey sizing up a predator. And then came the incident on Ganymede Outpost. The mistake that shattered everything. Protocol demanded we leave nothing behind, especially not propulsion tech. But a junior engineer, careless and too confident, forgot to purge the diagnostic core of a Scout-class warp sled after a meteor drill. We didn't even realize the unit had been compromised until it was too late. The humans found it. We assumed, wrongly, that the tech would be indecipherable. The Zayari warp core is encrypted in multi-dimensional phase locks. Its housing is composed of alloys that don't even appear on a standard periodic table. It's designed to disintegrate if opened without biometric clearance. The humans didn't care. They didn't break it apart. They understood it. Somehow, by raw intuition or relentless obsession, they took the sled apart piece by piece in a makeshift lab under one of their polar research stations. No authorization, no translation manuals, no advanced tools, just human hands, stubborn minds, and what they called reverse engineering. Within 3 Earth weeks, they'd rebuilt the core housing from materials we'd never have considered viable. Within 6, they activated it. I saw the footage with my own eyes, first leaked through a dark loop of Earth's crude data web, then relayed through Intercept Beacon 9. A Terran engineer, sweat-streaked, oil-stained, standing beside our warp engine, alive, functional, and humming at 47% capacity. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. They didn't even know what they'd built. 1 week after that, Earth launched something they called Daedalus. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't beautiful. But it jumped. The readings confirmed a successful warp displacement of 0.32 light-years on their first attempt. We couldn't believe it. Council dismissed it as forgery, holographic tricks, artificially generated disinformation. But the fear was already setting in. Not because they succeeded, but because they didn't stop. They improved it. They didn't need our encryption. They didn't want our manuals. They built their own version from scrap, using data stolen through orbit scans and back calculations from the damaged warp core. They didn't just learn. They evolved. We sent observers, quietly, disguised as merchants, cultural liaisons. All of them came back shaken, eyes wide, some barely able to speak. I interrogated one myself, a seasoned ethnologist with 500 planetary studies under her belt. She said only one thing before resigning from her post. They dream with their eyes open, and they don't stop. Ever. I've seen the vids. Children, barely past their juvenile phase, pulling apart drones with soldering tools, civilians constructing propulsion models in their garages, military labs running warp tests without safety protocols, because they wanted to see what would happen. This wasn't evolution. This was a virus, an unstoppable force of hunger, curiosity, and recklessness. No fear of the unknown, no reverence for the sacred. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't ask for help. They took what we buried and improved what we thought couldn't be touched. We called them primitive. We were wrong. We may have just handed extinction to ourselves. They sent me next, not because I was the best linguist or the most seasoned observer. They sent me because I had something they lacked: caution. Where others had laughed, dismissed, or whispered in smug arrogance, I had watched. From the beginning, I watched the humans. I never called them primitives. But even I was not prepared. Touchdown was sanctioned under Silent Observation Treaty 9B. Unofficial contact. Cloaked landing. No interference, no threat. My pod was launched in low orbit and burned hot through Earth's atmosphere before dropping into a remote location in their northern continent. A zone they called Alaska. Frozen, brutal, and merciless. Fitting. My first encounter wasn't with scientists or soldiers. It was with a child. She couldn't have been older than 8 Earth years. Her clothes were ragged, her cheeks raw from wind, and her boots too large for her frame. She was holding a broken communications console I'd barely recognized, one of ours, scavenged and worn like a scavenger's trophy. I froze in place, invisible through my suit's cloaking layers, silently watching her dig into its casing with bare hands. She wasn't guessing. She knew where to pry. I scanned the module. Our encryption was still intact, the casing mostly sealed. There was no way she should have known anything. But her tiny fingers worked with practiced precision, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration. Then I saw the marks. Grease-stained notes drawn on the snow with a stick. Vectors, coordinates, translated glyphs. Zayari glyphs. I should have signaled for extraction right then. Instead, I followed her. She led me, unknowingly, to a structure deeper in the wilderness. What I assumed would be a small habitation was, in fact, an improvised laboratory. Primitive on the outside, yes. A converted hunting cabin. But inside was wrong. Pieces of our technology, components I couldn't explain how they got. Warp filaments, quantum shunts, even a disassembled fragment of a neural relay core we used in stealth cruisers. There was no logical way for any of this to be here. And there, in the center, a human adult sat hunched over a workstation, humming to himself. He was balding, mid-aged, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. He wore no uniform, no badge. His table was cluttered with handwritten notes, old coffee cups, and circuit boards smoking with fresh solder. He looked up. And for a moment, I could have sworn he saw me. The human reached into a crate beside him and pulled out a core stabilizer. Zayari made, custom tier, government restricted. He turned it in his hands. Then he tossed it aside like junk. "You're not even using crystalline refraction matrices," he muttered to himself, making notes. "No wonder they burn out. That's stupid. Someone's overcomplicating this on purpose." I ran. I didn't report it. Not yet. I needed to be sure I wasn't being tricked, that this wasn't some psychological trap laid by human intelligence agencies. So I went deeper. From state to state, country to country. What I found shook me more than any weapon. They weren't unified. That was the most terrifying part. There was no single empire, no central command. They were fractured. Nations, corporations, factions, private groups, even individual hobbyists, all working separately, competing, fighting, copying each other, stealing from one another in an open-source dog-eat-dog race toward innovation. They didn't care who got the credit. They just wanted to win. One faction had built a functioning warp tunnel from what looked like converted nuclear submarine parts. Another was attempting slipstream corridors using particles I hadn't seen since my academy years. A private lab in something they called Nevada had created a synthetic AI based on our language patterns, taught itself from intercepted comms, and now it spoke fluent Zayari with sarcasm. I returned to my vessel, finally broken. My report was cold, clinical. I cited over 1,000 violations of the Anti-Replication Accord. I documented human labs reverse engineering our tools. I included photographic evidence of their warp drives, their translation algorithms, even diagrams showing improvements we had yet to consider. I waited for them to act. Instead, the Council debated. They argued for weeks. Argued while the humans launched their second jump-capable vessel. Argued while footage leaked, showing a civilian activating a handheld translocator that used micro-warp pulses to skip across continents. The Council still clung to old arrogance. "Let them play," one member sneered. "They will destroy themselves before they can reach us." But I knew better. They wouldn't. They thrived in chaos. They adapted through failure. Every mistake they made just made them faster, sharper, hungrier. You couldn't intimidate them. You couldn't silence them. You could only slow them down, and even that, just barely. I thought about the child in Alaska, writing Zayari glyphs in snow. What happens when she's 20? What happens when all of them know how to build what we built? The first strike came quietly, an outpost on Zarnak Theta, remote, shielded, high orbit, one of our deep space relay beacons. Gone. No survivors, no explosion, just gone. When we investigated, we found radiation signatures, not ours, not even familiar, a kind of warp burn laced with fragmented traces of Terran isotope structuring. We tried to deny it, said it must have been pirates, a malfunction, a spatial rift. But we knew. 2 weeks later, a council diplomat received a package in his private chambers. Inside was a Zayari translator core. Modified, enhanced, powered by a Terran lithium cell. A note was attached, handwritten on primitive pulp. "You left this behind. We improved it. You're welcome." Earth. They weren't begging for a seat at the table. They were warning us. They were telling us, "We're already here." Panic set in. Finally. The Zayari, once proud, once untouchable, began clamping down. Surveillance increased. Border checkpoints were locked down. Outer systems were abandoned. We started purging outposts, wiping all trace of warp signatures before retreating. But it was too late. The humans didn't need us anymore. They weren't trying to catch up. They were already building things we didn't understand. A rogue faction in their southern hemisphere launched a prototype that didn't warp. It folded. Reality bent inward for brief seconds, allowing travel without motion. We didn't have the physics to explain it. We still don't. Another group turned one of our own relay drones into a trap. It fed false data back to our command network, causing 2 cruisers to jump into a gas giant, vaporized instantly. No mercy, no declaration of war. They didn't need ships. They had information. Our encryption, unbreakable for millennia, was treated as a puzzle challenge by a human subculture that gamified code breaking. Forums, communities, competitions. Zayari cipher cores were being traded like collectibles online. We weren't gods anymore. We were puzzles. And worst of all, they didn't even hate us. Not yet. They didn't destroy us because they wanted revenge. They simply didn't care. We weren't special to them. We weren't the center of the galaxy. We were just another species with tech they wanted to understand. And once they understood it, they moved on. Improved it, made it smaller, faster, deadlier. We thought hiding the warp tech would protect us. But the truth? We handed them the hammer. and now they're looking at the stars like nails. Back at Central Command, the high theorists gathered in silence. Holoscreens showed intercepted human experiments, warp fusion drives smaller than a shuttle's thruster, handheld translocators being sold to civilians, atmospheric skips, phase cloaks, neural mesh control systems embedded in pets. I watched one High Lord turn pale and say nothing for 7 minutes. No one laughed anymore. They asked me what I thought. I gave them one word: surrender. Not in war, not militarily, intellectually. We had to accept it. We had to face the reality that these so-called primitives weren't just rising. They were already ahead of us. I was told to remain silent after that. I didn't care. I knew what was coming. And then the final moment came. A broadcast, global, every Zayari channel, encrypted or not, intercepted, taken over. A human face appeared, not a general, not a president, just a man. Middle-aged, glasses, graying beard. He looked tired, like someone who had worked too long and seen too much. His message was simple. You hid your toys in the attic, hoping we wouldn't find them. We did. And now we're building our own. Better, faster, smarter. Not to fight you, not to dominate you, but because you tried to tell us we couldn't. And telling a human you can't is how you get us to do it harder, louder, and in ways you never imagined. He leaned forward. We're not coming for your empire. We're not asking for a seat at your table. We're building our own table, and soon, you'll be the ones asking to sit with us. Then the screen went black. The council hall was silent. No debate, no sneering, just fear. Pure, undeniable, earned fear. I was summoned to the core. That hadn't happened in over 100 cycles. Even warlords didn't get summoned unless the core was ready to shift policy on a galactic scale. But this wasn't policy. This was fear. The core chamber, carved into the crust of our capital moon, was buried deep beneath layers of null gravity shields and thought silence fields. No signal got in or out without clearance. The room pulsed with heatless blue light. 12 high theorists sat in silent contemplation, all older than any of our colonies, faces gaunt with the weight of a dying supremacy. None of them looked at me. Only the central figure, the prime theorist, spoke. Are they building singularity-level processing clusters? My breath hitched. It wasn't a question. It was confirmation waiting for a reaction. I nodded. Yes. On the Martian moon. Not officially, of course. It's a corporate conglomerate masked as medical research. But we traced the entropy signatures. They're harvesting quantum drift from Jupiter's radiation belt. Silence. How long until they reach sub-event control? Unknown, I said. But they won't stop when they get there. They'll go further. They'll break the laws just to see if they can glue the pieces back together better. Another counselor whispered. They've already begun experimenting with synthetic space-time layering, haven't they? I didn't answer. He already knew. That wasn't the part that kept me awake at cycle's end. It was this. They were doing it without fear. Zayari research protocols had 100 safeguards. Human labs, if you could even call them that, had teenagers building antimatter cells in converted warehouses. I'd seen it with my own eyes. I watched a 23-year-old woman argue with an AI over how to build a null-fuel engine, lose the argument, and build it anyway out of spite. That was the nature of them. They didn't work together because of some great unity or vision. They competed against each other so fiercely, so constantly, that even our brightest minds were choking in their dust. One of the oldest theorists muttered, almost in prayer, "We created gods. We handed fire to cavemen. We gave monsters the tools to climb Olympus." And he was right. We tried to push back, quietly, covert sabotage. Not open war. Zayari pride still refused to treat them as equals. But stealth operations were authorized. Our finest Spectre-class infiltrators were dropped across key Earth territories. We hit communications hubs, sabotaged power grids, implanted data corruption viruses in their research networks. It did nothing. We crippled their servers in Geneva. Within hours, they had rerouted operations through hundreds of smaller nodes, rebuilt their models using publicly archived data, and found improvements in our original logic. We collapsed a fusion test facility in Southeast Asia. It reopened in a former mall, funded via digital currency raised overnight through what they call crowdfunding. A literal army of civilians funded warp research like it was entertainment. Our agents called them insane. I disagreed. They weren't insane. They were addicted. To creation, to rebellion, to proving something. Maybe to us, but more likely to themselves. Even after we deployed direct psychological disruption broadcasts, sleep interference waves, subliminal paranoia triggers, chaos patterns, it backfired. They didn't collapse under pressure. They thrived in it. One rogue operator built an AI inside a quarantine zone. The AI self-replicated, created a defense algorithm, and fought our virus back into our own systems. A child's game to them, a catastrophic failure to us. It was the moment the High Command realized the truth. We weren't at war with humans. We were at war with the idea of being human. Because no matter what we broke, no matter what we corrupted or erased, someone, somewhere on that planet would rebuild it. Differently, smarter, worse, faster, and they'd upload it for free. They weren't building an empire, they were building a species-wide hacker collective. And we had no counter. I was sent to negotiate. Officially, it was called a diplomatic overture. Unofficially, it was a desperate grasp for relevance. They picked me because I'd studied their culture. I'd learned their languages, lived among them, breathed their polluted air, and listened to their bizarre music, and wept silently at the things they called movies. They made fiction that felt more real than our history. My landing was quiet, cloaked, hidden in a desert region called New Mexico, near a facility with ties to early human atomic research. It was now repurposed, a think tank funded by a group of investors, philanthropists, and ex-military engineers. They knew I was coming. Of course they did. I was greeted not by soldiers or politicians, but by a woman in her late 60s wearing denim jeans and a t-shirt that said, "Trust me, I'm improvising." She didn't bow. She didn't acknowledge the authority of the Zayari. She handed me a cup of thick black liquid, coffee, and asked, "Do you want to talk, or waste time pretending you're still in charge?" I sipped. It was bitter, like reality. "We don't want war." She laughed. "You already lost. You just haven't accepted it yet." I said nothing. She gestured toward the sky. "You don't get it. We were always going to get here. You just made it faster. You didn't suppress us. You inspired us." I looked around the compound. No guards, no visible weapons, just work, motion, screens, projects, humanity doing what they always did, building, tinkering, pushing. "You took apart our warp tech," I said. "Rebuilt it in weeks. That was never supposed to be possible." She shrugged. "You locked a door. We built a new house." Then she leaned in, eyes fierce. "You know what scares you the most? We didn't need your permission. We didn't need your blessing. We didn't even need your help. And we're still doing it better." She pointed toward a hangar. Inside, I saw it. A ship, human-made, warp-capable, armed with weapons we didn't recognize, shielding that bent light the wrong way, powered by a reactor that made my sensors flicker with static. No Zayari influence, no salvaged parts, pure Terran design, and carved into its hull, burned in with plasma welds, were words in ancient English. "Try and stop us." I returned home broken. No report could capture what I'd seen. This wasn't competition. This was evolution skipping steps. We had seen this before, on our own world. When lesser species rose too fast, when we caged them, slowed them, tamed them. But we had never faced one that didn't stop climbing. And now? They weren't just climbing. They were building rockets while still falling. That's the best way I can describe them. They fail upward. They embrace collapse because it makes them rebuild stronger. Their history is a cycle of disaster and recovery that would have obliterated any Zayari civilization. War, disease, famine, ecological ruin, nuclear brinkmanship. And somehow they kept going. I began to wonder, what would happen if they didn't see us as irrelevant anymore? If their curiosity turned into contempt? What if one day they stopped laughing at our superiority and started avenging the centuries we spent mocking them? Because here's the truth. We never saw them as people. We saw them as things, as a curiosity, as an experiment. We hid our best technology not to protect them, but to stop them from polluting it with their chaotic, dangerous creativity. Now look at us, begging for a seat at a table they don't even acknowledge exists. I asked the Corps for permission to step down. They didn't argue. They knew the war was over. Not in bloodshed. Not with battles. It ended the moment a human child drew Zayari glyphs in the snow and made something work that we had locked behind 6 layers of encryption and cultural arrogance. It ended the moment they didn't just replicate our tech, but made it obsolete. I watched our empire rot from the inside. It began in whispers, then erupted like a sickness through the council ranks. Our leaders, long drunk on absolute control, couldn't comprehend a galaxy where the Zayari were not at the top of the ladder. They had no answers, no strategies, no counter-moves, just endless analysis of human behavior that no algorithm could predict. They called humans irrational. Number that was too kind. They were uncontainable. They didn't play by rules. They broke them and then rewrote them mid-fall, just to see what happened. The high theorists had once likened Terran behavior to lightning, chaotic, blinding, and lethal. But lightning strikes only once. Humans were a storm, endless, wild, evolving every time we thought we understood them. And now, that storm was tearing through everything we had built. Even the outer colonies, the ones raised on Zayari propaganda and hierarchy, began to question. One by one, our vassal species, our subordinates, our silent watchers, they stopped answering our calls. No rebellions, no uprisings, just silence. Because they were listening to Earth now. The humans had their own broadcasts, their own message relays. Somehow they'd intercepted ancient galactic bands long abandoned by civilized races and filled them with their voices. Not threats, not declarations, just stories, music, dreams, philosophy, wild, reckless emotion bundled into sound. And it worked. I heard one of their transmissions myself, picked up during a scouting trip in the outer arc. A voice, soft and unfiltered. We're not perfect. We break things. We fight. We fall. But we get up. Every time. You want to talk gods and empires? Fine. We build our own. With our bare hands. From ash. From junk. From ruins you left behind. And if we don't know how, we learn. And if we can't learn it fast enough, we steal it and then make it ours. The signal ended with laughter. Not malice. Not hate. Joy. They were enjoying this. Back on Zayari Prime, fractures became factions. We splintered, first ideologically, then politically, then militarily. One group, the purists, argued for preemptive eradication. They wanted to unleash every forbidden weapon we'd locked away since the Treaty of Fractured Suns. Black hole missiles, memory erasure pulses, planetary collapse triggers. Another faction, the Scholars of Silence, argued the opposite. Surrender. Integration. Let Earth lead. follow them, study them, become like them before we were completely replaced. I fell somewhere in between. I didn't want to destroy humanity, but I didn't want to worship them either. They weren't gods. They were a reminder of everything we could have been if we hadn't let comfort rot our ambition. They were us 1,000,000 years ago, before we grew cold, efficient, slow. One evening, a cloaked transmission reached my private array, encrypted in a frequency so old it was once used for deep mine labor orders. A voice I recognized instantly. You watched them like I did. You understand now, don't you? It was Karen, a former high theorist exiled years ago for heresy, for claiming that humans might one day surpass us. I'd testified at his tribunal, called him unstable, dangerous, wrong. Now I knew he'd been right all along. They're not just learning from us, Karen's voice said. They're surpassing us in every way, not because they're better, but because we stopped trying. I didn't respond. Meet me, he said. Outer Belt, Station 9. No guards, no council, just truth. I considered it treason. Then I left that night. Station 9 was derelict, stripped, floating on the edge of the Shattered Veil Nebula, where no trade routes passed and no civilization dared build. Karen was waiting, older, gaunter, his eyes sunken but burning with the same fire I remembered from his trial. He didn't speak right away. He just handed me a device. I scanned it. It wasn't ours. Terran, a data crystal embedded in a rough casing of carbon polymer alloy. It pulsed faintly in my hand. Alive, almost. It had no encryption, no security layers. It didn't need them. They don't hide their knowledge anymore, he said. They give it away, freely, to each other, to allies, to enemies. They don't care who gets it, because they'll always be one step ahead of what they just gave. I activated it. Inside was everything. Warp schematics, phase folding, AI recursion codes, weapon designs I couldn't even decipher. Humanity wasn't guarding its secrets, they were spreading them. Karen leaned forward, voice trembling. They're not building an empire, brother. They're building an ecosystem, one that no single mind can control, and it's spreading, through code, through culture, through inspiration. I asked, why show me this? His answer chilled me. Because the Zayari are dying, but we don't have to die with them. I returned home in silence, my face unreadable, my mind fractured. The core interrogated me, asked where I'd gone, what I'd learned. I lied, said I'd chased down a rebel transmission, no threat, no new information. They believed me, because they wanted to believe it, because the truth was unbearable, that we were no longer relevant. Then Earth made its next move, not with ships, not with weapons, with an invitation, a broadcast across the central frequencies of the Galactic Trade Alliance. Voice only. No demands, no ultimatum. We're opening a station, they said. Neutral ground, no empire banners, no hierarchies, just ideas, exchange, innovation. If you're ready to talk, we'll listen. If not, we'll be here anyway. They didn't name it after a battle, or a planet, or a king. They named it Hope, Station Hope, built in orbit around a rogue planet, lit only by artificial suns and powered by Terran-designed fusion cores. It was beautiful, brutal, alive. We sent observers. They were greeted with warmth, handshakes, questions, curiosity. Not once were they asked for allegiance. Humans didn't want followers. They wanted peers, and that made them infinitely more dangerous. Then came the first defection. Not political, not military, scientific. High physicist Maltran, one of the Zayari's greatest minds, vanished. 2 weeks later, he appeared in a human broadcast, laughing, working, surrounded by Terran engineers. I spent 200 years perfecting warp stability, he said. It took them 8 months to figure out how to make it obsolete. I'm not angry. I'm relieved. The council ordered his execution in absentia. He shrugged it off. I'd rather be useful than loyal. That single sentence triggered a wave of desertions. Young minds, technicians, designers, coders, thinkers, all leaving Zayari space for Terran workshops, labs, forums. Not because they were traitors, because they wanted to matter. Because Earth made them feel like they could create again. And what of the humans? They didn't gloat. They didn't attack. They invited. At Hope Station, they opened universities. Not schools. Forums of chaos where any being could contribute. Imagine a human teenager and a 6-limbed Tavarian data sculptor arguing over reactor flow physics while building a prototype in real time. That was Hope Station. That was Earth's message. You don't have to be human to build like one. The Zayari Council fell silent. Our empire still had weapons, fleets, worlds, but none of it mattered, because the future had already shifted. The humans had outgrown us, not through conquest, not through blood, but through progress. They moved so fast, so relentlessly, that the galaxy could only follow, or be left behind. And we, the once mighty Zayari, we sat in cold, dark chambers, holding on to crumbling titles and ancient blueprints that no longer impressed anyone. Because the new age didn't belong to us. It belonged to those who weren't afraid to fail, to break things, to rebuild, to share. And most terrifying of all, it belonged to those who weren't waiting for permission. The galaxy had never been quiet, but now it buzzed with a new rhythm. Faster, erratic, chaotic in a way that couldn't be predicted. At the center of it was Earth, and surrounding Earth was everything else coming apart. We lost our first allied race within months. The Torvi, a loyal vassal species since before the last Black Dusk War, cut all diplomatic ties. Their High Chancellor didn't even bother with ceremony. He simply appeared on a broadcast beside a Terran engineer, smiling, saying, "We've decided to choose relevance over reverence." That stung. But what followed was worse. They gave Earth access to their worm belt transit maps, routes we had kept hidden for centuries, the key to fast traveling through fringe sectors of the galaxy without relying on established Zayari gates. And Earth? Earth didn't hoard the maps. They shared them. Publicly. Posted to their open knowledge repositories like everything else they learned. And within cycles, entire trade routes, once taxed, licensed, and controlled by Zayari bureaucracy, were suddenly free. Merchants rejoiced, pirates cried, empires panicked, because Earth didn't act like a power, it acted like an infection, a fast-moving, idea-driven cultural virus that couldn't be quarantined because it wasn't delivered by warships. It was delivered by curiosity. Everywhere Earth spread, questions followed. Why can't we share this? Why do we need a license to build a better engine? Why are we following rules written by species who haven't innovated in 1,000 years? These weren't rebellious thoughts. They were dangerous truths. And across the stars, species began to ask those questions, not in riots, not in revolts, but in labs, in machine shops, in code. The Zayari Council held emergency summits daily now. They summoned me again, this time as a witness of decline. That was the official term. What it really meant was, "Tell us how much worse it's going to get." I didn't want to answer, so I showed them. Footage from Hope Station. 6 species, each one historically hostile to the other, sitting around a human-built reactor core, arguing about ways to optimize warp efficiency. No guards, no translator drones, just collaboration. I showed them a rogue moon base near the outer debris halo, where Terran students taught quantum recursion to an insectoid hive mind species using interactive holograms made out of memes. I showed them a weapons expo hosted by Earth. Not to sell weapons, but to let anyone redesign them for peacekeeping, asteroid mining, or civil defense. And they did. Thousands participated. Species that once feared humanity now worked beside them. The core was silent. Until High Strategist Velros whispered, "They're remaking the galaxy without firing a shot." Yes, exactly. Because Earth wasn't trying to conquer space, they were making space theirs by showing it what freedom could taste like, and no one who tasted it wanted to go back. And then came the backlash, because for every species that embraced Earth, 2 more began to panic. Old powers, stagnant civilizations, former conquerors now irrelevant. The Vocari Imperium declared humans a galactic plague and issued a cleansing directive. They sent dreadnoughts into human-allied space, obliterated 3 minor stations, and attempted to blockade Hope. Earth's response? Not a fleet, not even a warning, just 1 drone, a sleek, black Terran unit that transmitted this simple message on all known channels. "We see what you've done. You'll never do it again." The Vocari laughed. And then, in one blinding flash, every one of their dreadnoughts collapsed into singularity spheres. No weapons fired, no warning. Just precision strikes on weak points Earth had never had access to. Or so we thought. Later, we found out the truth. Vocari ships had been scanned years ago, at a human expo, as part of a foreign design review. Their own pride had given humanity the exact weaknesses to exploit. Earth didn't need to steal anything. They asked. And the galaxy was too arrogant to think humans could use it against them. The Vocari Imperium no longer exists. Their homeworld declared neutrality. They call it peace. But really, it's surrender in everything but name. After that, Earth's influence exploded. Hope Station went from a symbol to a headquarters for a growing interspecies movement. Not an empire, a network, no borders, no royalty, no throne, just knowledge, trade, evolution, and Earth never claimed ownership of it, because they didn't have to. Everyone knew who built it. The rest of us? We started to fracture even harder. Zayari core worlds began debating secession. Colonies once considered irrelevant started siding with human interests. Our own students left to study under Terran physicists. Engineers begged to intern on Earth stations. Technicians defected for the right to build without permission. The Council tried to ban Terran tech. But how do you ban something that's already in every back alley market, every open database, every blueprint forum? You couldn't. Earth had done what no empire ever managed. They made power accessible. And that was more dangerous than any weapon. But the scariest moment, the one that finally made me realize we had no future left as rulers, it wasn't the destruction of the Vocari fleet. It wasn't the collapse of our economic control. It was when one of our own ships defected. A mid-tier exploration vessel, Zayari class, went silent during a patrol near the Drenner line. We thought it lost. A week later, it reappeared, under human flag. No conflict, no war. The crew had voted. A full mutiny, without blood, without orders. They simply said, "We want to matter again." They renamed the ship Reckless Spirit. The humans cheered. They called the crew pioneers. And suddenly dozens of other ships began asking questions. The Council called it treason. But the crews? They called it freedom. I stood on my balcony the night we received the first Terran transmission directed specifically to the Zayari High Core. No threats, no gloating, just a message, spoken in perfect accentless Zayari. You taught us that knowledge is to be hoarded, that technology must be locked away, that progress belongs only to the anointed. We disagree, we share, we fail, we adapt, we build. And now your empire faces a choice: adapt or be left behind. There was no signature. They didn't need one. We knew who it was. The worst part wasn't the words. It was the knowledge that nothing we could say back would matter anymore, because even if we declared war, even if we summoned every last weapon from our arsenals, even if we somehow destroyed Earth in one glorious final stand, the idea would survive. It was already out there, already in the minds of the young, the brave, the curious, already reshaping the galaxy in ways we couldn't stop. We weren't just losing control. We had already lost relevance. The old guard began resigning, some in disgrace, some in silence, some simply vanished. The new council was younger, less proud, terrified. They started asking me what to do, the same me they once ignored. I gave them the only advice that mattered: stop fighting what you can't kill. Start becoming what you can't understand. They didn't like it, but they knew it was true. Because Earth wasn't a nation anymore. It wasn't even a species. It was an engine, driven by failure, powered by obsession, and pointed like a missile at the stars. I spent most of my days in silence now. My station overlooked the outer drift, fields far from the collapsing heart of our empire. Once, it had been a listening post for Zayari border patrols. Now, it sat empty, dusty, half the systems inactive, because there was no point listening anymore. Everything we feared had already come true. We didn't lose a war, we lost the narrative. And in a galaxy ruled by ideas, that's what truly ends civilizations. The most terrifying thing about Earth's rise wasn't their tech. It wasn't even their speed, or their weapons, or the way they shattered every scientific limit we'd sworn couldn't be broken. It was this. They never once asked us for permission. They didn't kneel. They didn't negotiate from weakness. They didn't demand we acknowledge them as equals. Because to them, we weren't part of the future at all. The core finally dissolved. Not officially, of course. Officially, they released a statement of strategic pause and formed an advisory committee to restructure interstellar governance. But in truth, they'd simply disbanded in fear. Half of them vanished into private exile. Some defected. A few tried to plead for Terran protection. One even begged Earth to let him teach at their universities. They denied him. Because Earth didn't need Zayari guidance anymore. They had evolved past it. I heard whispers of new human doctrines spreading across Hope Station and beyond. Principles that made old powers tremble. One was repeated often in interstellar forums, etched into ship hulls, even taught to children now. Make, share, improve, repeat. No flags, no chains, no taxes, just relentless iteration. And the galaxy loved it. Because Earth didn't tell them what to believe. They showed them how to build. More species began to defect, not by rebellion, but by alignment. The Dranks syndicates, once warlords feared across 5 systems, now posted their plasma cannon blueprints to open-source libraries. The Vlurians abandoned their planetary caste system after watching a Terran short film about freedom. The Thaskari once sold war machines. Now they built terraforming units based on Earth's agricultural drones. And still, Earth didn't ask for tribute, didn't form a council, didn't build a capital. They built networks, platforms, forums. The seat of power wasn't on any planet. It was floating in code, digital, decentralized, alive. And it grew every day. I watched a transmission from a former Zayari colony once loyal to the core. They held a public ceremony, declaring their planetary constitution invalid. Not because of invasion, not because of coercion, because they'd adopted a Terran design framework for governance. Yes, design. Not law, not tradition. They treated government like software. Outdated policies were patched. Corruption was debugged. Transparency was required by open-source compliance. They voted on laws, like updates. They held public forums on neural channels, argued in real time, built better systems with each revision. It was a democracy, but faster, smarter, iterative, and it was working. I met a human once, a man, older, soft-spoken, with calloused hands and a tired face. He'd been part of the first wave of Terran scientists who studied our warp tech. Now, decades later, he returned to our space, not to boast, not to negotiate, but to learn something we still had that Earth didn't: cultural memory. He sat with me in the ruins of one of our great temples, and he asked a question no Zayari had ever dared ask me before. Do you miss it? I didn't understand. Being at the top, he clarified, being feared, revered. Do you miss that feeling? I wanted to say yes, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, I didn't miss being feared. I missed being relevant. I missed mattering, and he saw that in my silence. You still can, he said. You just have to let go of the throne. No one sits on it anymore. Then he left, and I sat alone for a long time, staring at broken pillars that once held the weight of a lie we called an empire. What Earth created, it wasn't a government. It was a culture shift, an unspoken understanding spreading like wildfire across the stars. You don't need to beg for progress anymore. You can build it yourself. And when that idea reaches a critical mass, no empire survives. Because even if you nuke the ground they stand on, someone will build a better version on the ash and upload the instructions for free. The last of the purest fleets made their final move. 10 ships, ancient but powerful, packed with all our rage, fear, and desperation. They targeted Earth's Mars-based foundry, believing it to be the heart of the Terran network. And they were right. It was. But by the time they arrived, the foundry had already replicated itself across 47 systems. Mars wasn't the hub anymore, just the first node in a self-replicating lattice of innovation and data. Destroying it was like cutting one head off a hydra. The foundry's death was symbolic at best. But Earth didn't retaliate with destruction. They sent a single ship to meet the remaining Zayari fleet. Unarmed. Just a civilian transport. The crew requested to speak, and when they did, the message was simple. We will never chain you. We will never rule you. But if you keep attacking, we'll leave you behind. And the future doesn't wait for those who stand in its way. That was the moment our final admiral surrendered, not to a superior fleet, not to a better army, to an idea, to the knowledge that we couldn't catch up anymore, that every strike we made was a footnote in a history already written without us. The Zayari still exist. We haven't been exterminated. We haven't been enslaved. We've been outpaced. And the shame is, we deserved it. Because we thought knowledge was power to hoard. They saw it as power to multiply. We thought hierarchy was strength. They saw it as a bottleneck. We wanted control. They wanted creation. And in the end, creation wins. Always. I've started teaching again, not under the Zayari flag, just teaching. Helping the younger minds understand what we did wrong, sharing Terran designs, comparing our old theories with their new ones. It's not for prestige, it's not for relevance, it's for participation. Because I finally understand what they meant. You don't have to rule to matter, you just have to contribute. Earth never called itself a new empire, and that's what made them unstoppable, because we never saw them coming. We were too busy watching the skies for warships. We never thought to check our own code libraries. Never thought the real invasion would come in the form of open-source innovation, shared blueprints, decentralized culture, and a species too stubborn to accept limits. By the time we noticed, they were already rewriting the galaxy. It started as a rumor, a whisper echoing through the abandoned sectors of the old empires. Former lords of once great systems met in secret halls, long stripped of their titles and trembling in the cold of forgotten power. They called themselves the Guardians of Purity. I heard about them first from a defected archivist, a pale, sharp-eyed former Zaori record keeper who now translated Terran science podcasts for fringe colonies. He said it with a tired look in his eyes. Some species don't want to evolve. They'd rather die than be remade. At first, I dismissed it as post-Empire paranoia. Everyone had seen how humanity reshaped the galactic order without firing more than a dozen meaningful shots. What more could these relics possibly do? But then, one station went dark. Station 451 Phi, a mining colony run by a collective of human-allied traders and ex-military scientists. Gone overnight. No signs of attack, no warnings, just erased. A few cycles later, a transmission appeared, broadcast from a cold, sterile void using outdated Zayari comms protocols. The galaxy will not be reprogrammed by apes. The old ways shall endure. Innovation without tradition is heresy. All traitors will be unmade. Signed, GOP. The Guardians were real, and they were desperate. Hope Station, once a symbol of harmony, locked down for the first time. Not because Earth ordered it, but because its citizens voted for it. And that distinction mattered. Earth never imposed martial law. It taught others to protect themselves with systems that adapted in real time. Within hours, Hope Station's code defenses were rewritten. Quantum A. I scanned inbound communications for embedded. Synthetics engineers cross-verified security patches and uploaded them to a public blockchain that auto-deployed defenses across 27 colonies, all before Earth's central net even acknowledged the threat. They didn't panic. They iterated. That was the human response to danger. Build better. Share faster. Come back stronger. But not all worlds had adopted Earth's system fully, and that's where the Guardians struck hardest. They didn't use weapons like the old empires. No cruisers, no missiles. They used something far more insidious. Memory bombs. Artificial narratives, perfectly crafted slices of manipulated history, designed to embed themselves into neural storage. Once inside, they rewrote perception. A single infected file could turn a curious child into a devout purist. Whole cities collapsed into ideological loops, convinced that Earth had erased tradition and infected the stars with chaos. Dozens of hybrid colonies fell into civil unrest, not because of what Earth did, but because of what Earth symbolized, the end of control. The Guardians of Purity thrived on one idea, that without hierarchy, order dies. That open innovation was the same as anarchy. That species needed to be ruled, not empowered. But the one thing they hadn't accounted for? Humans expected resistance. They weren't surprised. They were ready. I visited the outpost world of Pelion Delta, one of the planets infected by Guardian code. Once a bustling hub of shared research between humans and the Volari, it had gone dark for weeks. I landed under civilian clearance, escorted by a volunteer patrol. Half of them human, half of them alien engineers wearing tools as weapons. The city was quiet. Shattered holoscreens blinked old propaganda from the Purity movement. But deep beneath the colony's archives, I found something more important. A group of Terran students, no older than 20 by human standards, still working in a makeshift lab. Dirty, exhausted. eyes bloodshot from sleepless coding sessions. And on their screen, blinking in silent defiance, was a project labeled Counter-Myth Protocol, Reclaiming Truth Through Code. They weren't soldiers. They weren't politicians. They were storytellers, using algorithms to decode, deconstruct, and destroy Guardian memory bombs. And when I asked why they stayed, their leader, a soft-spoken young man with cybernetic fingers, simply said, "We fix what breaks, even when what breaks is how people think." That, right there, was the difference. Empires crushed dissent with power. Earth erased it with participation. Where the Guardians spread fear, humanity offered tools. Where the old guard clung to myths, humans wrote manuals. And slowly, bit by bit, the false narratives began to crumble. But the Guardians had one final card to play. A superweapon, not a device. Not in the traditional sense. A Zayari-built prototype, never deployed, locked away after the Seldrin collapse. We called it the Null Heart, a weapon designed not to kill planets, but to erase progress itself. It emitted a localized distortion field that scrambled causality, rendering advanced tech inert by disrupting the sequence of invention. Warp cores reverted to iron shells. Quantum AI lost their sense of time. Gravity stabilizers became dead rock. It didn't destroy, it de-evolved. The perfect weapon for those who feared the future, and the Guardians stole it. We don't know how. Maybe one of their sleeper cells survived within the inner vaults. Maybe they had help from one of the old bureaucrats, still bitter about Earth's rise. But they activated it, on the edge of Orion's bleed, where 3 Terran-inspired civilizations had just begun colonization together. 15 planets went dark, thousands dead, not by fire, but by forced regression. Human-built reactors collapsed into molten slag. Modular habitats lost their pressurization controls. Whole terraforming systems just stopped working. And the worst part? The survivors remembered everything. They remembered the tech. They remembered the progress, but they couldn't rebuild. Not without tools, not without power, not without systems that no longer functioned under the Null Heart's field. The Guardians broadcast one last message. See what your chaos brings? A galaxy of broken toys and burned dreams. Come home, obey, and we will fix what you ruined. It was Earth's lowest point since their rise. For the first time, they had no instant solution, no easy countermeasure. Even their AI admitted confusion, and for the first time since humanity stepped into the stars, the network paused. No memes, no blueprints, no code drops, just silence. Then, in that silence, came a ripple, a soundless ping through the Terran net. A signal, a message sent not from Earth, but from one of the affected colonies. I still remember the line. "We remember how it worked. We'll build it again, from nothing, if we have to. One bolt, one circuit, one breath at a time. You can erase our tools, but you will never erase our will." And suddenly, the network roared back to life, not with orders, not with strategy, with blueprints. Human engineers across 100 systems started building pre-tech restoration kits, modular packages made from basic materials, designed to function within the Null Heart field. Within days, Earth deployed counter-NPUs, nanite reconstruction platforms made from raw elements, shipped via slip drive to affected colonies. Every survivor was handed a kit and a phrase. "Start again. We're with you." And they did. I watched footage from the colony of Varn Delta. A 12-year-old girl, human Valari hybrid, powered up a hand-spun generator made from spare metal and copper coils. She hooked it to a storage array rebuilt from salvaged ship plates. Behind her, 20 people cheered as the lights flickered on. Their first spark of power since the collapse. Their hands were blistered. Their eyes were wet. But they smiled. Because they knew, no matter how much you break humanity, they always rebuild. The Guardians fell within weeks. Their members betrayed each other. Their leaders were found hiding in fortress relics, still clinging to blueprints they didn't understand, shouting about order while the stars passed them by. No one feared them anymore, because the message was clear. You cannot unmake progress, not when it's already part of the species, not when the next generation was raised to build it from nothing. The Null Heart was captured, not destroyed. Earth locked it away in a museum. They didn't hide it. They labeled it clearly, the last weapon of the dying age. This device was used to erase progress. We keep it here, not to celebrate fear, but to remind ourselves. Some will always try to rewind the clock, but we will always move forward. And move forward they did. In less than 3 cycles, the lost colonies were rebuilt, not the same, better, faster, stronger, modular systems powered by designs refined through adversity. Every destroyed AI was replaced with 2 better ones. Every ruined reactor was rebuilt smaller and smarter. Because to humans, failure isn't the end. It's part of the build process. I never expected to live long enough to see the galaxy without thrones. But here I am, old, faded, irrelevant in the eyes of the world I once served. And watching, quietly, as a species we once dismissed redefines everything. Earth didn't just rise, they leveled the field, not by conquest, but by showing the stars that you don't need a throne to lead. It has been 40 cycles since the Zayari fell from power. We were never invaded. Our cities still stand, our science still exists, but no one asks us for answers anymore. They ask the humans, or more accurately, they ask the network. There are no Earth-run empires, no banners hanging over conquered worlds, no forced compliance. Yet almost every thriving civilization now runs on Terran systems, education, research platforms, innovation hubs, distributed AI cores. And most importantly, culture. It was never the tech that made Earth unstoppable. It was the mindset they seeded. Now that mindset runs through nearly every species in the known galaxy, not as law, but as instinct. I sat in a lecture hall last week. Not in a Zayari city, no. That era is gone. This one was carved into a drifting asteroid, hosted by a community of mixed-race builders from over 20 species. I saw humans, yes, but also Vlurians, Thascari, Sarekri, and even a few Crone who had long shunned organic design. They were arguing, loudly, passionately, with blueprints flying across hollow panels and data packets zipping between minds. It wasn't chaos, it was progress. And at the center of it all? A young boy, maybe 16, skin lined with cybernetic threading, explaining why he thought the current warp anchors were lazy and how he planned to fix them. No one laughed. No one silenced him. They listened. That's Earth's legacy. Not domination, not superiority, empowerment. They made it normal for the next generation to challenge the old one, not as rebellion, but as refinement. The term human era is sometimes whispered among older species, but no one on Earth uses it. If you asked them, they'd say, "Nah, this isn't our era. This is everyone's." And for once in galactic history, they'd be right. They gave the galaxy the blueprints, but didn't demand loyalty. They gave the systems, but didn't charge for access. They shared everything, and somehow by doing so, they own nothing. Yet they lead everything. Hope Station is now the anchor of galactic collaboration. It spans moons. It grows every cycle. It houses over 1 million minds, species once enemies, now cohabiting as builders, researchers, creators. Zayari still live there. So do humans, so do hundreds of races we once never allowed to speak in our halls. And at its heart is a library, one like we never built because we were too afraid someone might read something we didn't approve. Earth doesn't have that fear. Their great archive isn't just a record of knowledge. It's a living organism of ideas. Ideas that breathe, ideas that evolve, ideas that cross species lines and rewrite the definition of what it means to be sentient. We used to think hierarchy was necessary, that the galaxy needed a top, a center, a crown, but Earth showed us a structure with no peak, just a rising tide, lifting anyone who wanted to climb aboard, even us, even me. My granddaughter builds starships, not for war, not for dominance, for exploration. She grew up on joint Zayari-Terran colonies. Her first words were split between our tongue and theirs. She never knew the age of empires. She only knows the age of access. And when she talks about her designs, it's with a glint I've seen only once before, in a human child's eyes. The one I saw decades ago etching Zayari glyphs in snow. That spark. It belongs to her now. But it doesn't belong to her alone. It belongs to the galaxy, because we all caught it. I once asked an Earth historian how humanity survived so many cycles of self-destruction before rising into the stars. His answer, we never learned to quit, even when we probably should have. That stubbornness, now refined into obsession, tempered into empathy, is what drives the entire galactic engine. A drive not to rule, not to own, but to understand, to try, to fail, to rebuild better. Old Zayari structures now serve new purposes. What were once grand towers of command now function as schools, makerspaces, code temples. Our archives, once locked, are now open source and constantly updated by volunteers. Do you know what it feels like to see a crone youth correct a 700-year-old Zayari formula and casually explain it to a Vokari child using a Terran metaphor? It feels like justice. Not the revenge kind, the healing kind, because it means we're no longer gatekeepers. We're participants. We are no longer feared, but we are finally respected, and there's a difference. You might think humanity grew soft, that with power came peace, and with peace came fragility. But no, they've just changed what strength means. Once, strength was measured in fleet sizes. Now it's measured in adaptability. Once, victory was claimed through obedience. Now, it's defined by how fast your ideas inspire others to build. I received an invitation last week, not a formal one, just a ping in the universal code lattice. A message embedded in the footer of an engineering schematic Earth had distributed. It said, "You were there when we first started learning. Now it's your turn to teach us something we missed." That's how they do it now. They don't form councils. They issue invitations. You can decline. But why would you? My final trip was to Origin Base 0, not on Earth, but around Earth, a floating city constructed entirely by an interspecies coalition, orbiting the planet that began it all. They call it the Cradle of Curiosity. It isn't a monument. There are no statues, no flags, no gold plates etched with victory, just halls, rooms, labs, cafes, a school, and everywhere, walls of screens showing active projects from every corner of known space. No centralized command, no Earth-first protocols, just contributions, comments, version histories, test builds, failures, fixes, dreams, a living document of progress. I walked through that station without guards, without clearance, without being questioned once, because here everyone's allowed, everyone can contribute, no matter their past, not even mine. I left behind a small data chip, a design I'd sketched 50 years ago, a theory for photon-spliced microdrives that never quite worked. It failed in every simulation. I gave up on it decades ago, but I uploaded it to the shared archive anyway, just to see, just to share. 3 days later, I received a message. "We got it working. Thanks for the idea. Signed, a 14-year-old from a moon I can't pronounce," I cried. Not out of regret, but out of release. I wasn't a Zayari elder anymore. I was just a builder again. And that's everything. So, what is Earth now? What are humans? They are not conquerors. They are not saviors. They are not rulers. They are the match that lit the fire we didn't know we were sitting in. They are the reminder that if something is broken, you fix it. And if someone tells you not to touch it, you take it apart anyway, because the real danger isn't rebellion, it's stagnation. And Earth doesn't stagnate. They break. They learn. They rebuild. Faster, smarter, louder. And they bring the whole galaxy with them. We hid our warp tech. They took it apart and rebuilt it on the spot. And then they built more and more. And now, they're building the future. And this time, we're all invited.